好，歡迎大家嚟。
Welcome to today's media briefing of 2022 Employment Support Scheme ESS 2022. We'll start with a photo call. In the middle is Secretary for Labour and Welfare, Dr. Law Chi Kwong, and on his right is Head of PICO, Ms. Doris Ho, and on his left is the appointed agent for government from PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Sam Z. The Secretary will first speak. Afterwards, Ms. Ho will give you details about the application under the 2022 ESS. Thank you. I'll now give the floor to the Secretary. Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, that starting from January this year, in order to curb the fifth wave of outbreak, social distancing measures have been greatly tightened, which in turn dealt a heavy blow to a number of sectors. And in turn, the number of employed people has increased. The Chief Executive has, on the 18th of March, decided to launch another round of ESS, Employment Support Scheme. It's a new round 2022 under the Anti-Epidemic Fund. It provides wage subsidies over May, June, and July this year. Every day, we see the number of infected cases drop to three-digit level. We see that the epidemic has stabilized. Previously, the Chief Executive has announced that starting from last Thursday, social distancing measures will by stages be relaxed. We do think that the relaxation by stages will inevitably slow down economic recovery, but it also takes time for market confidence and sentiment to recover. As you know, that the latest unemployment figure has risen to 5%. We reckon that the unemployment rate will continue to climb in the coming 3 months. However, looking at various factors, we have gone past the peak of unemployment rate. As long as the epidemic is under control, together with the various support schemes, we do think that the employment situation will improve. That's why we launched the 2022 ESS. This will dovetail with the relaxation of social distancing measures. We also would like to ride on the effect of the consumption vouchers in order to give an injection of confidence to enterprises that the outlook will improve. We hope that they will consider expansion as well as increase in their recruitment. On the 18th of March, the Chief Executive has announced the framework. We have been soliciting views from various sectors. On the 7th of April, the Chief Executive has announced that some of the views have been taken on board and improvement measures have been incorporated. That includes the removal of the 30,000 wage ceiling and the flexibility in the use of data in 2020 and employment support scheme as the maximum number of employee eligible. We also allowed relevant enterprises to change from the exclusion list to the restricted list. And we also relaxed certain restrictions of enterprises on the restricted list. In addition to that, we have added the 4,000 half subsidy quota to cover more part-time and temporary employees with MPF accounts. We've also expanded this scheme to cover self-employed persons as well as employees above the age of 65 years old with MPF accounts. We think that the 2022 scheme will benefit about 1.6 million employees as well as 140,000 self-employed people. We think that the amount of subsidy will stand at $39 billion. Taking into account contingency fund, the total commitment will be about $43 billion. We have received funding approval from the Finance Committee. We've been working on the details of the scheme. We will take into account the experience from the 2020 scheme. We hope that the new round will provide more flexibility to employers and to better protect employees and to use public money better to support employment as well as enterprises. The scheme will start receiving application this Friday, that is the 29th of April. It will last for 2 weeks and ends at the 12th of May. We hope that the first batch of subsidy will be dispersed in around May. For details, I will defer to Ms. Doris Ho. Thank you. The objectives have been covered by the Secretary. I'm going to skip over it. Self-employed persons as well as employers will find this scheme easier to apply. First of all, in relation to employer, they can make use of an application in 4 capacities. That is, a company, a corporation, an organization, or a natural person. A number of criteria have to be met. First, it's an employer not listed in Part 1 of the exclusion list. The exclusion list refers to the government, public organizations, and statutory organizations. I'll give you more information later. The exclusion list is basically the same as the 2020 scheme. The employer must have participated in MPF schemes or have set up also schemes on or before the 31st of December last year. The employer has not been involved in winding up the registration or striking off process or has not become dormant. In addition, the employer has fully settled all clawback or penalty of the 2020 employment support scheme, if any, on or before the 10th of May this year. We're talking about 860 companies involving about $77 million. This is the exclusion list referred to in the first criterion. They refer to government, statutory organizations, public bodies, organizations of the Central People's Government in the Hong Kong SAR. In other words, most companies are eligible. I'll now move on to the employer wage subsidy calculation. There are 5 major concepts here. The first 4 are interrelated. First, there is a reference month. The agent of the scheme can, on behalf of each employer, calculate the subsidized quota cap as well as the maximum subsidy amount. The employer has the flexibility that in relation to each subsidized month, decide how many employees will be covered. But the employer has to meet the requirements under the second and the third concept. I'll now go back to first, reference month. As I said, this is to allow the scheme agent appointed by the government to calculate the subsidized quota cap as well as the maximum subsidy amount. The significance of the cap and the maximum amount is that it's in relation to the maximum amount to be received by the employer in relation to the reference months. Employers who have participated in the 2020 scheme are those on the left column. They can choose between the reference month chosen previously by the employer as the specified month is a piece of information we already have. The second choice is to use newer information, that is the record in the fourth quarter. For the fourth quarter is October, November, and December. As to which one it is to be chosen, the agent will choose on behalf of the employer so that a higher amount can be received by the employer.
Well, if he chooses the quota in the fourth quarter, as I said, there will be new data. In other words, we have to wait till the employer has submitted their application, given this authorization, before we can ask MPF trustee to provide us with the latest data for the fourth quarter. So it will take more time, which means that the disbursement of the subsidy would be delayed. So we propose that, unless you have a very good reason, we would suggest that employers should choose the old data from 2 years ago. If, like 2 years ago, they haven't made any application for ESS, or if they've got no approval for a subsidy, then they would not need to make a choice, because then we would use the record in the last quarter last year on the same principle. That is, we would choose the highest eligible amount from the 3 months as the cap. As for the reference month, well, that is actually related to the subsidized quota cap and maximum subsidy amount. For the agent, how can they help do the calculations for the employer? First of all, he will look at the reference month. That is what you see on the left, far left of this table. And then he will divide the wage into 3 parts. That is $8,000 or above, which will be eligible for a full subsidy quota, which means $8,000, or at least $3,000 but less than $8,000. That is what we've added for casual workers, and those workers will be eligible for $4,000 in subsidy. And then we've also added one more category. That is employees aged 65 or above with less than $3,000. I will explain more on this category later, but you can look at the middle column. You can see that if the agent can distribute the wages into these 3 categories and then count for each category in relation to the reference month how many staff there are. And the number obtained for those making $8,000 or more will be the quota for full subsidy. And for the second category, there will be a half subsidy quota for those receiving $4,000. And also the last category will be those aged 65 or above with less than $3,000, and that will make up the elderly subsidy quota. On the far right, you understand that, I'm sure, that the amount, 8,000, 4,000 times the quota, which will come to the maximum subsidy amount. Let me say that for the subsidized quota cap and maximum subsidy amount, their significance lies in that in the future, employers, when they fill in the application and put down how many staff they are applying for subsidy for, then there will be a cap. So the quota cap and subsidy amount, or the half subsidy quota, all sorts of quotas have their role to play. And for those age 65 or above making less than $3,000, this is a newly added category because we want that for elderly staff, they can be entitled to additional protection or care. Because for an elderly worker who's still working despite their age, and if their wage is so low, then they may be struggling to make ends meet. So we want to offer subsidy for such staff. So for those making under $3,000, we only would provide the subsidy to those aged 65 or above. Hopefully, we can help this staff in the age bracket to receive the subsidy. Well, I just talked about the subsidized quota cap. As I said, that will be the basis for the employers in filling in their application to consider how many staff you can apply for. To most employers, well, it will the cap, the principle would apply, but there are 2 points they should bear in mind. That is, if the core business of the employer is on the restricted list, then the cap is only 100 eligible employees. You may recall what do we mean by sector-specific cap, because that's a new arrangement for the 2022 ESS. That is, we have put industries less affected by the fifth wave, like those working in the supermarkets, pharmacies, property management companies. They are actually put on a new list. So these are for enterprises on this list, even though their cap is 2,000 staff, they can still only apply for subsidy for 100 staff. Those who do not belong to the sectors on the restricted list, that is for larger enterprises, there is still a cap, which is 1,000. What does it mean? That is, say, if an enterprise is subsidized quota cap based on the reference month is 2,000, but still, it can only apply for a maximum of 1,000 employees in terms of subsidy. So this is what I mentioned, the restricted list. You may have seen this before in mid-April when we submitted our plan to the Finance Committee. The same list was shown. And now I'd like to talk about the chosen subsidized headcounts. By chosen, we mean that employers can choose. In the 2020 ESS, there are 2 flexibilities given. That is the latest ESS. Employers can indicate each month how many employees they are applying the subsidy for, and what is the distribution of subsidy. That is percentage taking food, percentage taking health subsidy, or elderly subsidy. So that's the one extra flexibility given to them this time. And the second flexibility is the subsidy month is May to July. But after they have given to us their chosen subsidized headcounts for those 3 months, we still allow employers to make changes afterwards in relation to the headcounts in June and July. In other words, as the Secretary just said, 29th of April, that is this Friday, application period will begin. So if the employer submits an application then for the chosen subsidized headcounts for May, June, July, if by early June, if they want to make changes, they can make the change for June. And by early July, they can make changes for the month of July. That is, the employers can, on the basis of the latest business situation, on their exact headcount, make assessment closest to the market situations.
I would like to show you this slide. Now that an employer can choose what they're supposed to do under the different categories, the leftmost column is to be filled in by the employer. That is, the full subsidy headcount, half subsidy headcount, as well as the elderly subsidy headcount. And the total is the chosen subsidized headcount. That is to be filled in by the employer. The middle column is the number of headcount times the amount under the different categories. That will be the wage subsidy received each month for the employer. When the employer fills in the number of headcounts, they will have to take pay attention to the conditions to be met, which is set out in the right column. As we've explained, the number of headcount should not exceed the full subsidy quota, half subsidy quota and the elderly subsidy quota calculated by the agent. Well, there is an undertaking by the employer in relation to the number of people to be employed. That is an undertaking that the government will check. We will check the number stated on the leftmost column, because that will be the number of people employed by the company, by the employer, in the form of an undertaking. Well, if the undertaking is not made good, there will be penalties. Well, the undertaking on the part of the employer is that the number of employees is to be used on wage subsidy, and the 4 points you see here is to be met as well. In addition, the situation will have to be reflected in the record of the MPF or also schemes in relation to the respective employment situation. We will retrieve the MPF also record for May, June, and July. What we look for is that the number of employees with a monthly wage of 8,000 or above, the number should not be less than the chosen full subsidy headcount. Point 2 is similar. From the record, we should be able to see that the number of employees with a monthly wage of 4,000 and above is no less than the chosen half subsidy headcount. Point 3 refers to employees aged 65 or above. From the records in May, June, and July, we should be able to see that employees aged above 65 with a wage of 4,000 or above is no less than the chosen elderly subsidy headcount. The 4th point is the sum of the first 3 points. This is important because you see that it's a measure to tackle subsidies going to those with a higher wage, as we've seen in the previous scheme. So we need to be able to find relevant record from the MPF or also scheme. The number of employees with a monthly wage of 8,000, 4,000, or age 65 or above will not be less than the chosen number. In the previous scheme, we found that for some employers, the whole amount of the subsidy is not used on the specified employee. Only a partial payment goes to the employee. The other amount will go to a different employee. Under this new round, we do not allow the employer to do that. We've also enhanced the penalty. In any 1 month, if the number of employees falls below the chosen number of headcount, they will have to pay a penalty equivalent to 10% of the subsidy amount to be returned on top of returning the relevant subsidy amount. Say, for example, they said that they would employ 10 people. In the end, only 9 were employed. And the employer will have to return 8,000 plus 10% of the 8,000, which is 800, to the government, a total of $8,800. The requirements, as shown in this and the previous slides, are higher because we want to make good use of public money to fulfill the objective that enterprises and employment will be preserved and supported. That's why we enhance the penalty to increase the deterrent effect. We provide flexibility to employers to tell us the number of headcount. We also allow employers to choose to change So this allows employers to make changes in accordance with the situation. So it is perfectly reasonable for us to enhance the penalty. In relation to assessment, to see if employers have made good their undertaking, we will retrieve the contribution record for May, June, and July. We will verify if they employ number of employees higher than the number of chosen headcount. And I would like to mention a few points here. If an employer would need to employ new employees to meet the undertaking, then employers will have to are required to open MPF employee account and make monthly contributions on or before the MPF contribution date for the months concerned. For those above the age of 65, then employers will have to report the monthly wage of the employees on or before the contribution date. In relation to casual employees, then the employer will have to report the monthly wage and make contributions for the employees before the contribution date. That's actually similar to prevailing requirements. But employers will have to pay attention when they employ new staff members. They will have to lose no time to open a new MPF employee account. Well, currently it's said that they need 60 days to open an account. But if you leave it too late and you can't make it in time, then it will be deemed as a failure to make good the undertaking. And for employers employing those above the age of 65, they are required to report the monthly wage of these employers. For employers under also scheme, they will be informed as to how to make a report and provide the information for May, June, and July. The government and their agents will make reference of the information to see if employers have fulfilled the undertaking. That's all for employers. Now we move on to self-employed persons. Under the new round, self-employed persons can make an application in an individual capacity. However, they will have to have successfully created an MPF self-employed person account on or before the end of last year and have not terminated the said account at the time of the application. And if there is more than one MPF self-employed person account, then they will have to submit only one such account in the application. You can easily tell whether the account is a self-employed person account by referring to the statement. Those who are self-employed, they can get a one-off subsidy of 8,000. Whereas we've said that at 8 o'clock in the morning on the 29th of April, application will start. It will last for 2 weeks and ends at 11:59 p.m. on the 12th of May. We accept online applications, irrespective of whether the applicant has made an application in the previous round 2 years ago. A fresh application has to be made.
So for those who 2 years ago have received subsidy, to those employers, but this time they need to use their application code back in 2020 and their business registration number. It's fine if they've forgotten them. After the press conference today and tomorrow, we will inform them through email and SMS. That is, employers who've obtained subsidy 2 years ago, they can get the application number from us again. And should the employees subsidized then have left, it's okay. If they haven't still received our email or SMS 2 days later, they can call us the hotline 1-836-122 or email inquiry@ess.gov.hk for inquiries. Once we have the application results, we would notify applicants via SMS and email. If approved, the subsidy will be credited to the applicant's bank account listed in the application form. So let me remind you as well, for employers who want to get the subsidy as soon as possible, if they have participated in the 2020 scheme, they please should use the same account number. For wage subsidies, they will be paid in 4 tranches. The first tranche will be subsidy for May 2022. Our goal is that employers, once they have submitted the application 2 to 3 weeks from then on, for simple cases, that is if, say, 2 years ago they successfully applied for the subsidy and they had used the same account this time, then in 2 to 3 weeks after submission of applicant, the first tranche of subsidy will be disbursed. The second tranche will be for June, and the third tranche will be for July. That is 70% of the subsidies of July. The remaining 30% will be disbursed in the fourth tranche, because based on the experience 2 years ago, for some employers who have not actually honored their pledges, then they may need to return some of the subsidies. So to simplify our administrative process, we will receive 30% of subsidies to be disbursed in the fourth tranche to pay for or to be used as penalty for employers should, such cases happen. And then we also offer one-off subsidy to successful SEP applicants. So talk about the auditing and monitoring mechanism. As you can see on the screen, before and after subsidy disbursement, we will conduct audits to determine whether any terms and conditions have been violated. As I mentioned earlier on, we will look at their also MPF contributions records for May, June, July to see whether the actual number of employees is the same as what they had set. And we also take random checking or if necessary, we might go to the employer's organization to do on-site auditing. So as the Secretariat, we do have the discretion, absolute discretion. If we consider that the employer has, during the subsidy period of the scheme, engaged in conduct which directly or indirectly violates the objective of the scheme, or is contrary to public interest, we reserve the right to require the employer concerned to return the wage subsidies received and pay a penalty. And similar to the arrangement 2 years ago, for the successful applicants, we would also disclose a full list showing the names of the employers and the subsidy amount they apply for, the distribution, and so forth. We will also seriously follow up on all alleged reports and complaints. Well, we're doing this together with the government agent. Even though the work is outsourced, but the responsibility still lies with us. So in dealing with the cases, we would, for important, cases, we would maintain close communication with the agent. And the Secretariat will also set up a review committee to deal with the cases of complaints. You all know that applicants providing false information or falsified information or withheld some information, then they could be liable for criminal offenses. And the government adopts a zero tolerance for unlawful cases. 2 years ago, under the scheme, there were suspected cases involving employers, and we referred them to the police for investigation. Late last year, the police took arrest actions involving 2 enterprises. So here are some details for inquiry. We've got a website set up, which should be actually by 4 p.m. will be up and running. And there's also a live chat function on the website. So whether it's for the self-employed persons or employers, if you want to talk to our staff, you might use the live chat function or send email to the email address on the screen or call our hotline. We also provide free interpretation service for ethnic minorities, and applicants, should they need special help in helping them fill in the application forms, we've got 5 service centers available. But please remember that you need to call the hotline first to make an appointment. And I also hope that please show your understanding based on the experience 2 years ago. On the first few days, normally the hotline would be very busy. And so we have expanded the capacity of the hotlines, but still in the first few days, you may need to wait a bit longer when you call the hotline. And lastly, applicants, please note that if you want to know the application status, after submitting the application, you can go to our website for information, and please pay attention to SMS and emails because those are the channels we'll communicate with applicants. And if the information provided is incomplete, then an SMS or email notification will be sent to applicants to request supplementary information before or on a specified date. And the information should be provided to the government or the government agent. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. So now it's time for Q&A to let you have more chances to ask questions. So maybe each media outlet can ask 1 question. In the back, please. Good afternoon, I'm from Cable. I want to ask about just now you said that enterprises in early June, early July can change their subsidized headcount. But if they choose to change their subsidized headcount, would they receive the subsidy later than those enterprises who are not making changes? I don't quite get your question. Could you ask your question again? Well, just now you said it in early June, early July, you could change the subsidized headcount. Okay, should they do so, then will they receive the subsidy later than employers who do not make any changes?
The time will be the same. In relation to June and July, after the employer has made the application, we would ask them to verify and make changes for the figures in June and July. Whether they change the figures or not at the beginning of June and July, the system will be opened for making changes. If an employer does not make any changes during that period, we will use the headcount on the application form for the disbursement. So for timing, it's actually the same. In the middle, I'm from Sky Post. Well, you talk about 2020 ESS. The month's cover was May to July. That was December 2019 to March 2020, any 3 months. So it starts from December 2019 to March 2020. Employers may choose any 3 months in that period. Can you give us more information as to which months were chosen by the employers and the distribution of the choices? I don't have the information at hand, but I can tell you how employers choose. Well, the employers would consider out of the period between December 2019 and March 2020, they would see which month would enable them to receive a higher subsidy. Towards the back in the middle, I'm from Now TV. For the 2022 ESS, given the current situation with the epidemic situation stabilizing and the relaxation of some social distancing measures, how much do you think the unemployment rate will be alleviated by these? When do you think the unemployment rate will significantly improve? There is this element of choice, but you will have to check the record in NPFO also. Is it an active check or a passive check? How much manpower and administrative cost will be involved? Will it be more than the previous round? Let me first explain that the unemployment rate announced is the average in the previous 3 months, that is January to March. The next time when it's announced, it will be for February to April. What we look at is the upcoming unemployment rate. We think that it will be higher than 5%. It's very likely that it will be higher. But when we look at vacancies and other information, if we look at it chronologically, we have passed the peak. In June, when we announced the figure for March, April, and May, we think that the figure will be lower. That is because, first, the start of the consumption voucher. 2, the relaxation of social distancing measures starting from the 21st of May. The next stage of relaxation will be 19th of May. So the announcement made in June will cover the average for March, June, and March, April, and June and May. We see that in mid-May and in mid-March, when the chief executive has made the announcement, certain enterprises have started to make plans for their personnel matters, taking into account the subsidy available. So the peak has gone, but we announced the figure for a 3-month average. So we'll have to wait for the next stage before we see the peak. You ask about verification of whether the undertaken headcount chosen is actually done. We have to obtain information from MPF schemes and also schemes. That is something that we will definitely do. Every employer will give an undertaking as to how many people they would employ. So of course, the government has the duty to retrieve every single record to verify whether the employer has honored the undertaking. You may be concerned about administrative cost. I don't think you need to worry too much about that. In relation to MPF record, we use a system to do it. We use a computer system to verify the information. So the administrative cost will not be significantly higher because of the verification. On this point, I would like to say that in our past round of ESS, we have kept the amount of administrative cost at less than 1% of the entire scheme. The lady at the back. From In Media. A lot of employees have been sacked, and you launch the ESS now. Isn't it a bit too late? In mid-March, when the chief executive made the announcement, the epidemic situation was quite severe. But starting from mid-March, the epidemic situation started to stabilize. At that time, the number of infected cases was about 400 per day compared to just over 100 in the previous outbreak. To contain the epidemic situation was the government's priority. Launching the ESS too early would not be an opportune time because social distancing measures at that time were quite tight. The chief executive announced the relaxation at the first stage on the 21st of April, and the second stage will start in May. There was the consumption voucher in May, and the second stage of relaxation in May. We think that with wage subsidy over May to July, it would be at the right time to help employers and enterprises to get back on their feet. It took time to work out the details, to obtain funding application from the Finance Committee, and to make necessary updates. So, application starting this Friday is actually the earliest time we managed to do it. Let's take an English question. The gentleman.
RTHK, Dr. Law, what kind of safeguards are in place to ensure that the money will actually go to the employees and we won't see employers firing, say, for example, existing staff and hire a new one with lower salary? Say, for example, will employers be required to list out the names of the workers who will receive the subsidy so that it will be easier for authorities to check later? Thank you.
I would say the mechanism here we apply is basically rely on the MPF contribution records. And for those records provided by the applicant through the trustees that we will receive, we will be able to tell how many and how exactly each one of the employees on the list are receiving from the employers. And in this particular scheme, in the 2022 ESS scheme, we actually require, if we have given each one a full-time staff $8,000 wage subsidy, then as appear on those records, they will at least receive $8,000. And they will be nothing less than $8,000. And in fact, if it is, say, $7,500, that is the actual wage, and yet the employer has to give them $8,000. So by checking the records, we can ensure that the employers are not pocketing the money on their own accounts, but to pay to each individual employees. But I also have to say that there is what we call a normal turnover, that an enterprise may employ new staff and staff may resign. So there can be natural turnover. So we will not be checking on individual information per se, but then at least we know that they are paying the employees, each person, a given minimum amount.
Okay, thank you. 好，我哋呢邊呢，粉藍色衫。
This one in light blue.
International Business Channel. So the first question we would like to ask is, theme parks were also closed for almost 3 months during the fifth wave. So why are they also considered as sectors on a restricted list? And we would also really want to ask one more question is, if a person has 2 MPF accounts, one with an eligible company and one is a self account for her freelance work, so does that mean he or she can receive the subsidy twice?
Okay, let me try to answer the last one first and see if you can supplement. In fact, let me try to say it this way. Although in our description, we keep on saying that we were given the subsidy to the employees. As I answered the previous question, that we'll check the records, whether in the MPF records, whether each one received certain amount. Say, for full-time, they will at least be $8,000. But in reality, we are paying the employers to pay the wage subsidy. So the record as shown in the trustee information provided to us are actually the payroll paid out by the employers. It is not the money that coming from the ESS to the individuals. Now, let's say an individual actually have 3 employers. Okay, no matter one person can have two full-time jobs and 1 part-time job. I have seen cases like that. He or she will still receive the wages from the employer. Okay, so that will be their normal wages, and the different employers will receive the subsidy from the ESS program, and that is how it works. Although you can say the person actually received ESS subsidy indirectly through the employers. So let's say what you said is one of the case. If he or she has a self-employed account, okay, a self-employed person account, and that person will also have a part-time job with another employer. Now that person will be able to apply for himself or herself through the self-employed person scheme, that $8,000, but this one-off for the whole period of time. But then if she or he works with an employer as a part-time staff earning something like, let's say, $5,000 per month, and through that employer, he or she will receive that $4,000 subsidy. But if her salary is actually $5,000, it will be $5,000. But out of that $5,000, you can say $4,000 come from the government. Okay? I hope I explained the logistic of that flow. Sam, you have anything to add?
No, I think there are circumstances where, as the Secretary has said, a self-employed person can also be an employee, and, the scheme has not restricted, these circumstances or these persons to apply.
Okay. 咁我哋翻到嗰
Okay, at this side, please, in the middle. Person wearing a red mask.
CMP News, an English question. May I ask how many people or employers actually got fined in the last scheme? Is that figure considered high? That's why the government is now considering to propose tougher punishments this year. And are random checks or receiving complaints enough, or can more be done to regulate the measures? Thank you.
Doris?
I think for the 2020 ESS, there were a total of about 150,000 employers successfully applied for subsidies. About 80%, they are all good. They are all good. They have complied with their undertaking. That means they have employed no less than the number of employees they have committed in the first place. And then there are about 18% who fell short of their undertaking by 1 to 2 persons. So I would say that the situation is not that bad, but from the policy objective of protecting as many jobs as possible, we would like to put in place a heavier penalty to provide a stronger deterrent effect against any non-compliance.
好唔該晒。好，咁啊，我哋就
Well, we've got 3 more questions. On this side, Economic Times, and then, okay, then we'll okay, then I think there will be 4 more questions. We'll try to answer the 4 questions in the remaining time. Okay, I'm from Hong Kong Economic Times. I'd like to ask you about the move to increase penalty this time. How do you assess the deterrent effect of the increased penalty? Is it enough? Because there are quite a number of violations in the previous scheme. Are you considering actually creating a blacklist, showing the names, or banning the companies which have violated the rule from applying again? As I said in my introduction, if companies that have not paid the penalty, they will not be eligible to reapply. If they have paid up the fines, then they can reapply. As for whether the deterrent effect is enough, as Doris mentioned, for an employer with 10 staff, the subsidy a month would amount to 80,000. But if in May they hired 9 staff, then he should have returned to the government at least $8,000. But the subsidy received was 80,000. Its penalty is 10% of the amount. That is, besides the 8,000, the employer will need to give out an additional 8,000. So which means that they will need to pay us back to the government $16,000. Well, there is the flexibility involved because the employer would tell us how many staff they hire. That will be the cap to us. And they don't need to actually hire really up to the cap, because it all depends on the market. And also we'll see in May, June, and July how many did they really hire. So I believe that with this flexibility, this would actually deter the employers from taking a risk on their own. We hope that in terms of making good use of public resources, this can be a better arrangement, because ultimately we need to be cautious in dealing with possible cases of abuse or violations. So, say, if the difference between applied number and also actual number of staff employed, if it's not too big, or if it's too big, then we'll see what to do. We may need to carry out investigation if the gap is too big. So we hope that we need not carry out a lot of investigations. In May, June, July, we will need to deal with the applications for each month. Time is really tight. So that's an important consideration for us.
個阻嚇力嚇。
Thank you, Secretary. At the front, I'm from TVB. First, about penalty. Well, for 2 years ago, we saw that about 860 enterprises owe about $77 million in penalty. How come they can drag on for so long? Are you concerned that the same thing will happen? Well, for the last penultimate tranche, you will disperse 70% and the last one 30%. Why would you think that someone would make use of the 30% to pay the penalty? Or is it the case that the government's planning to use the 30% to deduct the penalty? Your understanding is correct. Perhaps I wasn't clear. Withholding 30% is for the eventuality that the employer might not have employed the undertaken number of employees. So that amount is for paying penalty as well as the returning of the relevant amount. We've learned a lesson. We don't want to the whole matter to drag on like what happened 2 years ago. So we will withhold a certain amount of the last tranche for that purpose. The reason why it has taken so long, we were talking about 150,000 employers in the last round. For some employers, when we ask for the amount back and to pay penalty, quite a number of the employers have paid punctually, but there are some who refuse to settle the matter with the government. That's why in this round we have imposed another condition. That is, before the 10th of May, all outstanding amount and penalty will have to be paid to the government before we process their application. May I add that in the last scheme, there were 2 phases. So one is April to June, the other one is July to September. If there was any incompliance, we would use the amount of the subsidy to be dispersed in the second phase towards the penalty. But that means that, well, if we impose penalty for the second tranche, we will have to dun them for the outstanding amount, which is difficult. That's why this time round, we disperse 70% in the penultimate tranche. We reckon that withholding 30% will be sufficient for paying the majority of the penalty and the outstanding payment. We hope that there will not be a 6th wave, because the 6th wave may change a lot of things. I'm from cable TV. The unemployment rate is 5%. So to what level will the ESS bring the unemployment rate down to? How effective do you think the scheme will be? If the unemployment rate maintains the same, would you defer the start of the new round? I have given details about what might happen in the next announcement, but I can't tell you what exactly will happen because a number of factors are at play. If you refer to the effectiveness of the 2020 ESS, we will have to look at all the relevant data as well as the epidemic situation before we could come up with an accurate description about effectiveness. So it's difficult to say now. You may recall that in the 2020 ESS, It started when there was the third wave. Towards the end, it was the start of the fourth wave. So you will have to look at the epidemic situation, the employment situation, and the unemployment situation. That's what we will look at. I was unable to answer you as to how much the unemployment rate could be brought down to, because there are many other factors at play. If employers are optimistic towards the future, they may make an application using the figure at a higher level. So it's not for us to say how many people will apply. Depends on how the epidemic will pan out in the coming few months. I'm from Commercial Radio. First, about specified months. You mentioned that the employer could choose the figure in 2020 or this year. But if the previous figure is chosen, does it mean that they will have to use the same level in terms of headcount as well as salary level? Is it the case that if they choose the figures in the last round, they will get the subsidy earlier? What is the difference? The Secretary mentioned about it being difficult to done payment. What would you do if employers refuse to pay? For the 30%, does it mean that the government will verify all information to ensure compliance before dispersing the 30%? Last question. A number of legislators as well as people from the business sector ask to withhold an MPF ordinance. Are you confident that this bill will pass? You have asked numerous questions. If the specified month is used based on 2020 ESS, we already have the information. There are three categories: full-time, part-time, and those who are above the age of 65, earning at least 3,000. We make reference of the specified months. We will then be able to calculate the maximum amount. You mentioned about wages. It's not something that we consider. We look at the minimum amount of wages. For full-time is 8,000, for part-time is 4,000. If it's someone above the age of 65, they will get at least $4,000. If they choose a month in the fourth quarter of 2021, then we need to retrieve the information. We think that the difference will be 3 to 4 weeks. So the earliest, it will be dispersed in the first half of the month. If additional information is required, it's very likely that the employer will have to pay the wages first before we can disperse the May subsidy in June. If 99% of the applicants use the information in the 2020 ESS, then as a whole, the disbursement will be earlier. It's difficult to say. You ask about 70%. If an amount is applied for, but the undertaking is not honored, we would not ask for any payment back. We will make a deduction from the June disbursement. If a penalty is to be paid from the June subsidy, then before we disperse the July amount, we will first deduct the penalty. For the July subsidy, we will disperse 70%. After we have received all the information, after we have verified that everything is complied with, then we will disperse the 30%. If there is any incompliance, we will deduct the amount from the 30%. But if it's over and above the 30%, then we will have to chase them. That is your last question, right? The government will endeavor to complete the cancellation of the offsetting mechanism before the end of the legislative year. This is a legislative amendment. By the time it's implemented, it will be 2025. We will have to wait for the full launch of eMPF platform before there will be a complete abolition of the offsetting mechanism. We think that by 2025 the economy will fare better. So using today's economic situation to say that the bill should be postponed is a not very strong reason. That's the end of the press conference. Thank you.